So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Sorry, I've got to stand. I've been told I have to stand here. Good morning. Welcome to everybody. We're live streaming today, so the speakers will be standing quite static. Some technology issues with panel mics, but that's fine. So welcome to Rip It Up, Start Again. The disruptive community is being built around us by many entrepreneurs, and Rip It Up, Start Again is discovery and connection. It's to provide a stage for disruptors, give them a voice, and for those that are thinking about disrupting, are thinking about involving themselves in this wonderful world, this wonderful community, it's for them to watch and get tips, probe, ask questions. There'll be a sort of mentor-y situation developing in the future as we build this event into more of a platform, a real platform. So that's the hope and the vision. But we need to be able to learn from others. We need to start collaborating more. We need to pay it forward. Only this week, I met a new company that's starting up. They've built a platform. It's called Grobit. I asked permission if I could share it on this live stream. And they're literally building a whole new marketplace. Let me describe a little bit of the story for you, because it's still new. They're still looking for investment. They've had their first tranche, but they need their second tranche. So you're sitting on the tube, for example. Let's be London-centric, because that's where we are today. And you notice a really nice pair of shoes. Take a photo of it. When you get into Wi-Fi, it'll find that, where it's being sold. It will give you the search of which is the best price. You can buy it, and then you can send it on and you can share it. When your community then buy it, you get a kickback. That's loosely the concept. So this whole purpose economy really is starting. Rip It Up, Start Again actually talked about the purpose economy, and we had that as one of our themes year before last. So we started this back in April 16, for those that you don't know. So this is what it's about. It's about people connecting and learning from each other and really trying to build this disruptive company. You know, one of my goals is obviously to those 64 companies in the world that seem to rule the world, watch out. You know, this community is really happening. So some thank yous before I hand over and introduce my speakers. Thank you very much to our main sponsor, Runway East. As you all know, we actually founded this at Shoreditch House until they found out we live streamed. It took them a year and a half. So they've been very, very kind. And then we have Seth Roden, who's sitting there in the front. Amazing copywriter, brings a voice and a challenge and strategy to everything that he writes. I urge you to use him. I've used him on and off over the years. He's a fabulous friend now. Hannah Pope, who's marketing, she's upstairs. She's helping us out, so thank you to her. And thank you to Amigo, who are our production partners. So they're the guys that have brought all the lighting equipment, the cameras, and a live streaming, and helped me edit a little bit. You'll see on our website that we haven't spent a lot of time on the edit. We're going to do that more in the future when we have some more money. But they've been fabulous. So thank you to Amigo. And that's it, I think, on the housekeeping. Any questions afterwards, please ask them. I obviously spend a lot of time networking. I know a lot of people, and I always like to help make introductions, join the dots. I'm basically a commercial person, so I like brands to grow. That's my kick. But I want to help people do it. I don't actually do any of the doing. I just make sure that everybody gets connected to the right people, and that's kind of what Lulu Laidlaw Smith is all about. So, first speaker of the day is Douglas Orr. Douglas Orr is the founder of Novastone. Novastone is an unhackable messaging platform, I like to say. He'll probably challenge that, and that's fine. We can all challenge here. It's an open forum. So it's a messaging platform which enables and brings relationships, and is sort of pushing email out of the way and making it redundant, in my opinion. So Douglas Orr, if you'd like to come up and tell everybody all about you. Thank you.
So, to start my presentation, I click that button,
Oh,
There we are. I've sort of figured it out. Oh, this works.
you can use that.
I can use that too.
Yeah.
Great.
Just click it down.
Great. I want to tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm from Canada, just for people who want to make sure to get that right. That's me up in the right-hand corner running. I'm also a bit of a runner, though not as much as I used to be back in those days. And I went to university.
You're going to wonder.
I went to a university in Canada called Queen's, and a very good engineering school it was. And I studied engineering to build those things which were very popular, silicon chips. But I found them quite boring, and I ended up playing with these 8-inch floppy disks when I graduated, which tells you something about the fact that I'm probably the oldest person today speaking. And one of the reasons I got excited about it was I thought that personal computers, when networked, could replace these things. That's an IBM 360 mainframe in the bottom, costing millions, special environments, etc. And I just thought these boxes at the top were going to disrupt. And they did eventually. I mean, you still have mainframes out there, but the world has moved on from a mainframe-centric world. And then I disrupted my own life. I went from working in Toronto on local area network technologies. I went to Sweden, worked in banking technology with local area networks. It was with a traditional retail banking platform company, Philips. And I was brought in as the token guy talking about that new technology, local area networks. Don't buy it, but we'll bring him in to tell you about this new exciting technology. I went on to Australia, worked with the same stuff down there, and then I disrupted my life once more and came back to Norway. And I worked for, and during this time I worked for a number of large corporate companies, selling technology that I always thought was exciting on the leading edge. So up in the right-hand corner is a Wellfleet router, which was number 2 in the world to Cisco in those days. And I just saw how routing technology was disrupting again the world of integrating networks together. And this on the right-hand side was a super server for NetWare, which was the network operating system of the times. And in the bottom right-hand corner, I ended up selling, my last job before I started my own was being the manager for Scandinavia of a Canadian storage company, which sold hard disk drives as an external box to those things on the left. And I got fed up working for corporates though, because I was like third violin in a very large orchestra, and I was frustrated with how they ran things, and of course, being the arrogant young man that I was, I thought I could do things better. And one of the things I could see that was happening with regards to those hard drives, when I was selling those hard drives, we were selling 10 gigabyte hard drives for $5,000 at a 50% gross margin. And that was not going to last. And the business I was working for was starting to fail, and it was failing quite quickly. But at the same time, I could see that the amount of data storage that we were selling meant that it was doubling every 9 months. And I could see that what was relatively a small amount of data, 20, 30, 40 gigabytes, was becoming hundreds of gigabytes and terabytes very quickly. And this, so I just borrowed this for the graph, not for the X and the Y axis. But this is the difference between an exponential growth and an arithmetic growth. And if you can hitch your wagon to something which is an exponential growth, you're probably onto a good thing. And the thing I thought was that data storage was growing exponentially, but the tools were really archaic. So I decided, I came across a piece of software which I thought was going to be the leading software in the world for backup. It was a relatively small company in California. It was about 40 or 50 people when I got interested in them. But they already had, I was living in Norway at the time, and they already had 4 established companies as distributors in Norway, a little country of 5 million people, and they weren't going to add me as a 6th distributor. But they had a Hewlett-Packard Unix version of this software. The software was called Legato. And I went to the people who built that software, lucky for me, were in Ontario, Canada, and I said, how would you like to have a Norwegian distributor? And they said, sure. Nobody's called us from Norway before. You can be our distributor. And I became their distributor in Norway. And before too long, I was outselling all the other. I started a one-man shop. It was just me and my $3,000, which is all I had in a very expensive place like Norway. Money doesn't go very far in a place like Norway, if you've ever been there. But I got the exclusive rights for this Hewlett-Packard Unix version of Legato. Was soon outselling all the established 4 channels. So Legato caught wind of this, and they sent over one of their sales reps on the tour. And the guy running the region said, "I'd like to meet with you, Douglas, after I've met with the other 4 distributors in Norway." And I met this guy for some beers at the end of the day, and he says, "I'd like you to buy from one of our local distributors." I said, no, you want to make me the distributor for Norway. Look, I'm outselling all your other distributors. And they thought, what the heck, if he screws up, nobody's going to find Norway on a map from California. So they made me the distributor in Norway and got rid of the other guys. And before long, the Norwegian part of Legato was outselling all the rest of Scandinavia put together. So then I got Denmark, because we don't want to give them everything. And then they gave me Sweden, and then they gave me Finland. And I built that business, and it was very successful. It had a different model of distribution. So if you're familiar with distribution for computer products, you would be familiar with most of these product companies. They sell thousands upon thousands of products at a very low margin, and basically they're a bank and a barn, a distribution point. They don't create markets, they don't support markets. And my model is the exact opposite. I would have 3 or 4 product lines. We would have very high margins on our products. And I sold that business in 2001 for £11 million, which was a good return on the $3,000. And we had a gross margin of about 35%, which is pretty remarkable for a distribution business. Anyway, that was my first adventure in Norway. It brought me back into corporate land as part of the earnout. We sold to SunGard, a big California-based, big American-based financial services software products. And I got spat out after a year because me and corporate life just didn't work, and they spat me out. And I became an angel investor because I had too much money, I had too much time, and this is what happens. And some of the investments went okay, some of the investments went bust. One of the ones which went bust, I thought had some potential, but there were some issues around the people who were running the business beforehand. And I took out of the administration process the IP that I thought was interesting. And after some interesting pivots, how much time do I still have? I still got some time. Good. And it was the software was built to find information on the web the way the human does. This is pre-AI and all that sort of stuff. But it was pretty smart software. And initially I was selling it into people like the Medical Health Regulatory Agency, who were using it to find people selling dodgy versions of Viagra and other sorts of stuff. We sold it to people interested in real-time intelligence. The product was way ahead of its time. Nobody could budget for it. They didn't understand it. And one day I met with Dixon's up in Bury. Dixon's, their business, Dixon's, and they said, "Douglas, nice interesting product about intelligence out there. That's not the intelligence we need. The intelligence we need is the pricing at eBuyer, because we are surfing the eBuyer website all the time to try to find the competitive price of eBuyer's version of the same product. And because we do it so frequently, they block access. So we have to go down to the local cafe now to read it, find out what the competitive pricing is at eBuyer to price our products." And I said, "Well, how about if we hosted it for you? How do we gather all the information, delivered it to you every day in a nice spreadsheet? Would you be interested?" Absolutely. And that was the pivot from the IP that I purchased out of admin into what became originally Cogenta, NetPrice, and Scope, which was another pivot around that product. We became the leading provider of pricing intelligence. It was a SaaS model for, we would collect 10 million price points every morning, organize it to a 99.5% level of accuracy, which was way above anyone else in the industry. Became the leader. Clients like Never Knowing Undersold John Lewis was our biggest client and our most demanding client, but in a positive way. And we exited 6 years ago to GFK, who are the global leaders in retail pricing intelligence. Which brings me to my latest adventure. So, you know, I take a break after all these things. So I took a break having sold to SunGard and became an angel investor. I took a break after Kagenta, and I worked for a friend of mine for a year. But you know, as often as the case, I have a little, you know, I get my idea, my head around an idea, and I start thinking about it. And when I first made my millions, I was introduced to something called private banking. Now, private banking, for those of you who do not have a private banker, is a banking service on steroids. It's like Jeeves, the financial butler, who takes care of all your needs, helps you invest. You know, and I loved it. I could, you know, from a point previously where banks didn't want to know me, now they wanted to take me for lunch. And they would accept an email instruction saying, send $3,000 to my mom in Canada. And I'd get a response saying, hey, you know, it's done. Half an hour later. I loved that experience. And that experience continued until about 2010, where from one day to the next, I'd send an instruction and I'd get no reply. Instead, I'd get anonymous phone numbers onto my phone. I don't know how about you. I don't answer my phone these days unless somebody messages me first. I sure as heck don't answer anonymous phone numbers. It turned out it was my banker saying, I need to check that it's you, Douglas, and do you still want to send money to your mom in Canada? You mean like the other 40 times that I've done it? Yeah, okay. What's the problem here? Well, it's security. We don't trust email anymore. And this was 2010. It was 2015 where I just said, 14, 15, I said, there's got to be a better way. In the meantime, the world of chat had taken over my life. I love chat. I love communication. I hate email. I love how chat brings people emotionally closer together than email. I love the lower level of effort it takes to engage with chat. And I was inspired to say, well, why can't we bring that world to the world of that banking relationship? Well, it turned out there was like 15, 20 reasons why that couldn't happen. Security, compliance, security. You know, I partnered up with a guy named Andrew Hodson, who was a private banker who just left Barclays. And the reason he left Barclays is that he got to invest in one of his clients' businesses called DeepMinds. And DeepMinds had just been sold to Google. And he had all this money, and he said, I'm tired of this banking and the politics. Can I invest in your company, Novastone? I said, great. Let me tell you the 13 people who are going to say no to any innovation at the bank. So we spent 6 months, this is not a hackathon effort, we spent 6 months doing the use cases. We spent those same 6 months looking at the security architecture, all the things that were going to be required for us to be accepted as a solution. We spent 12 months building the software and then getting tested by pen testers. And then we made our first sale last year. If you've ever had to work with banks, you know that this is a long, long, painful process. That being said, I'll come back to the success part in a minute, but this is our vision, is to help institutions like banks, law firms, legal firms, move their client relationship out of the mailbox, which is a horrible experience, getting worse by the day, into something that they own, that is branded, secure, is compliant, is recorded, because it has to be recorded for banks, they're a regulated industry. Well, at the same time, we now also embrace things like WhatsApp and WeChat into the solution. And that was a pivot I'll come back to in a few minutes. And then we've also learned to extend our solution into how do we take the existing legacy software of these banks, the CRM systems, the workflow, the core banking processes, and turn them into a conversation. Because everybody hates paperwork. Everyone prefers to have a conversation. So I'm proud to say 2018 was a huge breakthrough year for us, with installations now in Asia, in Switzerland, in North America, and the UK. We are working in retail banking, we're working in corporate banking. We did one bank here in the UK earlier this year where they tested it with clients of theirs who were sitting in treasury teams on FTSE 100s, who were bookkeepers at amusement parks. They wanted a range of clients. And they saw a 90% shift away from email to using Novastone within 90 days. They saw a 50% drop in the number of phone calls from those same clients, and huge satisfaction for both the staff and the clients of the bank. But all the time this is, this is about disruption. And, this middle piece, if you'd asked me a year ago what my opinion of WhatsApp and WeChat was, I said it's great for your personal life. It will never be accepted by the banks we work with. And that changed, partly because in Asia, all the clients and bankers are already using WhatsApp and WeChat to do their communication with their clients. And until, let's say, April, May this year, the authorities in Singapore and Hong Kong were using a don't ask, don't tell approach. We know that you're using WhatsApp, but don't tell us about it. But they said, listen, there are technologies now that allow you to capture WhatsApp and WeChat conversations. We now ask you to capture these conversations. And so our clients said, could you not look at this again? And we looked at this again and we said, wait a second, we have an existing platform. We can just extend our existing platform with all those good things that the bankers love to a WhatsApp, to a WeChat conversation. So that has been transformational for us since we announced that product in July, started demoing it in August. We've got another 10 million, 40 million pounds worth of annual recurring revenue projects that are in various stages of development now since we did that pivot. And I guess the learning process never stops. There's so many things I could talk about, the things I've learned through the years, and I've learned most of them through making mistakes. And I'm inspired by the guy behind this rocket, Elon Musk, who is the greatest living entrepreneur right now in my lifetime. This is one of the two companies he runs, and this is a picture of one of his rockets about to crash and blow up to smithereens. But the point is, after doing this 3 or 4 or 5 times, I can't remember how many times it blew up, he got it right. And now every one of those rockets is landing correctly. And I saw a statistic that's showing that next year his SpaceX business will have 50% of all the commercial rocket launches in the world. That's amazing. And again, talking about failing fast, one of the less principles I applied from the very beginning of my business is that try to figure out what your business, you're very small, you have to figure out what your business model is and test it to destruction. I love things like the business model canvas. If you haven't used this in starting a business, I suggest you look it up. And Steve Blank, who's the inspiration behind that. But you you create a business model, and I can tell you in every business I've created, at least 50% of my initial assumptions were totally wrong. And your job is to find out as fast as possible which of those 50% are wrong. So I like to focus on saying, is this assumption correct? And put as much resources as possible into testing that presumption and finding out if it's real or if it's not real. Because if it's real, great. If it's not real, you move on to another solution as quickly as possible. That's me in my younger, skinnier days. And I couldn't find I didn't want to put a kitten hanging from a rope or something like that. I wanted to talk about tenacity, which is different from perseverance. Perseverance is just hanging in there for dear life. Tenacity is about hanging in, learning, and moving on to the next target and the next target and the next target. And if you drop out of the race, you're out of the race. You don't have a ticket in this game anymore. And you shouldn't just hang in the race for the sake of being in the race, but hang in the race. You wake up the next morning, things that you thought were a catastrophe yesterday might still be a catastrophe, but maybe you found a way of moving a little bit forward. And that's certainly been my experience. I've had so many times in my experience building businesses where you get incredibly lousy news and you think, well, I'm not sure I'm going to figure that one out. You wake up the next morning, maybe go for a run, and you work out a possible solution to it. And the third principle for me that works for me is about courage, because what we're doing here is not obvious. If it was obvious, all the big corporations would be doing it. And even when it seems, and even when you are pursuing this, a lot of people will tell you your idea is stupid, that it's not worth investing in. It's been done by other people. So if I look at my first business, which was a distribution business, people would say, well, you're not a Mary Cell at C2000 with billions of dollars of inventory. How are you going to compete with those big guys? And the answer was, I found a different model to do that. And the second business, how are you going to compete with AC Nielsen and GfK? These companies are massive, huge. They got more engineers than you'll ever hire, which was true. But I had a better focus, and I had the courage to drive through the pivots quicker and faster than they can in large organizations. And in my current business, I have competitors to the left, sort of like, WhatsApp, owned by Facebook, and I have competitors on the right, like Slack, but not really. These are not really my competitors. They do not tick the boxes for the particular market that I'm working with. But in order to go into those spaces, you have to have the courage and the faith of your convictions. So that was really the words I wanted to share with you about my experience doing innovation. I love those little discoveries which you get out of sales meetings or with clients, and one of the reasons we do all of our development here in London, which is where I'm based as well, is I like the distance between the client feedback and the development team to be as small as possible, so that there is no misunderstanding, that we get the maximum value out of these little insights. So one of those little insights the other day is we're adding, 6 months ago, if you'd asked me, what's data leakage protection? I'd say, what? Data leakage protection is what banks talk about to stop bankers from saying the wrong things to the client. So we don't want bankers to say, Lulu, buy this product for me today. I guarantee you'll get 100% return in the next 45 days, and you'll help me make my quarterly bonus. Okay, wrong on a whole bunch of different levels. And there is software that exists today that stops bankers from sending that email. And I can do the same thing for the conversations with the clients of a bank. And when that light bulb went on, I said, wow, that's amazing. We could do that. We've got the architecture, so we're going to do that. And it turned out, wait a second, we can extend this to the WhatsApp and the WeChat conversations. There's no way our competitors can do that, because all they do is capture the WhatsApp conversation. We can actually block the banker from saying these inappropriate things to clients and help the organization weed out the naughty bankers. But it's those little nuggets of gold I search for, and I encourage my client-facing staff to bring back one nugget a month for me. As just little insights. Doesn't mean you act on every one of them, but you collect them and you find enough stuff which inspires both your team, yourself, and your clients. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Are we hearing the sound through? Great. I think we need to speakers keep the mic. If you're going to walk the stage, keep the mic quite close. I'm sorry if that's an irritation. Thank you very much, Douglas. Courage, very, very important. The world of disruption for me started a very, very long time ago. Those that know me well will not be surprised by I was called precocious as a child quite frequently. I actually didn't know what it meant, and I wasn't that interested at the time. I thought it was one of those silly adult words. I'm not going to pay any attention whatsoever. I'm going to continue asking the question, why? And I think, disruption's part of that, isn't it? We're continually asking the question why. We're breaking the status quo. And, I urge people to continue with what Douglas says. The courage that it brings is really, really, really important. Right, I am now going to be very unprofessional and change the presentation to our second speaker. Sorry about that, but I couldn't actually put the presentations together. So our second speaker is Max. Max, are you in the room? You are. Max, if you'd like to come to the stage. So Max is the founder of Finimize. Finimize is making finance accessible to everyone. I think you have a strapline that's slightly different. I think he's talking about millennials, but I'm not a millennial, so I feel a little bit isolated. I actually subscribe to Minimize. I think it's absolutely Finimize, sorry. It's my first thing I read, actually, in the morning before I get up. So thank you very much. Let you entertain everybody.
Great, thank you. So my name is Max. Can you hear me well with this? Yeah. My name is Max. I'm originally from Berlin. I always say I left Berlin when the city started getting cool and hip, and everybody started moving there. And because I started studying here in the UK and the US, and then kind of very randomly ended up in Switzerland, which we can talk about. But I guess today I kind of just want to talk about a little bit how I got into sort of the startup space, what we're doing now, and why I think it's exciting. I don't really have any sort of life lessons. I agree with everything that was said before, but I'd love to sort of make this as interactive as possible. Feel free to just shoot up your hand if you have a question, and I'll leave some time at the end for any questions that you might have. So I'll just tell you very quickly sort of about myself. I've always really been into technology. So I was, like I said, grew up in Berlin. I was the first kid in my high school who had a website, and that was back in the day when you used like Dreamweaver and FrontPage and that kind of stuff, if you guys remember that. And all my website did was I had this book with Bart Simpson jokes, and I just like sat in the computer room and like typed up the Bart Simpson jokes, and that was my website. And then like all these kids were coming up to me and were like, "Oh, awesome! This is so cool!" And I was like, "Wow, that's actually pretty cool! Like I created this, and now people are coming up to me and saying this is really, really exciting." And then I kind of like got distracted, as I like to say, by the business world when I started to study economics, and then you kind of like get pushed it or like pulled into this world of finance and like banking, and everybody wants to do consulting. And I did that for a year, and then I basically found myself just all day like reading about TechCrunch and all this other stuff that you can read about, and I was like, that is actually really cool. What I'm doing is pretty boring, just pushing around boxes on a PowerPoint. And so then I had this friend of mine from high school, and he also wanted to do something in the startup world, and he had done an internship at a chocolate customization startup in Berlin. And then he came up to me and he said, "Hey, why don't we just do this in London?" And so I was like, yeah, better than doing this consulting thing. And so we explored it. I did the typical sort of research, blah, 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 blah. We had found a chocolate manufacturing company, I think in Hackney, this factory. And we were really, really close to doing it. And then sort of one day I looked at it and I was like, fuck, I have no connection with chocolate. I never eat chocolate. Why the fuck would I do a chocolate company? And then we said, okay, let's not do that. And then we played around with a couple of other ideas, and ultimately he had studied in Switzerland. And so when I was 24, he and I basically went over there, and with a couple of his friends from university, we started a company called Dein Deal, which in German means your deal. And in essence, what we did was started off with a very much with its daily deal model, which probably most of you have used. And then I guess what we did well is that we moved fairly quickly away from it. And so we started that, like I said, when I was 24. Did that for roughly 5 years, and sold it at the end of 2015. We ended up being the largest e-commerce platform in Switzerland. So we had a higher brand awareness than British Airways. And we were selling to 25% of all households in Switzerland, which, if you think about it conceptually, is kind of crazy. And so the other day I was actually back there, and this lady at the counter, like 60 years old at the supermarket, she had known of our company, so that was kind of cool. And we did that basically for 5 years. Like I said, I kind of did everything from setting up the supply chain. I'd never been to a warehouse. I thought like supply chain was the most boring thing you could possibly imagine, and it is. But it's super crucial for e-commerce. And then the last couple of years really focused on building out business intelligence, strategy, and data science. So we built our own data warehouse and sort of the stuff that says, hey, people like you have bought something like this, which on the surface seems really easy, but actually is really, really complicated. What else? We were at the end of 2015. Then we like I said, we sold the company. We had something like 200 employees. We had done 100 million in annual revenues, and I always like to say we were a very big fish in a small but very wealthy pond. And then we had a couple of offers, and took one from the largest Swiss media company of Switzerland. So that was my first really entrepreneurial experience. And now I'm building a company called Finimize, which I will talk about a little bit. I think what's interesting, sort of, as I was listening to the previous talk, was I'm kind of in these two sectors, retail and now sort of personal finance, which before I got into them, I would have never thought I would get into these, because I always thought they were the most boring sectors that you could imagine, in my personal view. So like there was nothing sexy or exciting about them. And then somehow like these opportunities came up, and then I just found myself in them, and then kind of made the most out of it and learned a lot and really understood them. So that was really, really exciting. So I'll tell you a bit about sort of what I'm doing now. I'll run through it fairly quickly. And like I said, feel free to ask any questions that you might have. So this was me on top of Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. Like I said, I was living there, and I was in my sort of mid to late 20s, and everybody around me was saying, hey, you got to start, saving some money, whether it was parents or media and everybody. And so I took that to heart, and every month I just put money aside from my salary onto a savings account. And one day, got my mobile phone out, opened my bank account, and I realized, fantastic, I have savings. And the natural follow-up question was, all right, what do I actually do with these savings? And I'd obviously heard of all the robo-advisors and savings accounts and all that stuff, but when push came to shove, I didn't actually really know what to do. And I had to, even though I'd studied economics, I had to pretty quickly admit to myself that I was clueless. So I started asking a couple of my friends, a lot of them here in London or in New York, who worked in finance, what do you guys do? And I very quickly realized that they had exactly the same problem. They just had more money on their savings account. And sort of kind of puzzled by that, or even surprised by that, I then started to get professional advice. At the time, didn't have enough money to go to a financial advisor, so just went to my bank in the sort of a retail branch, and very quickly realized when they started laying out all the brochures of their products that this was actually a sales pitch rather than a advice session. So frustrated by that experience, as you do, went online, started Googling a bit, and basically realized that there isn't really a platform that could provide me with holistic and independent financial advice. And so that's when I started thinking, okay, I'm probably not the only person who has some savings and doesn't know what to do with them. And started digging in a bit deeper, realized actually, most people in my age bracket, late 20s, early 30s, actually save each month. But they keep most of their money in cash because there isn't really a suitable way for them to get financial advice. And that was kind of the genesis moment for me. And so this is kind of this, whereas the previous company that I started was very much a sort of mercenary business, and it was great to learn the whole spiel. This is very much now a missionary or a mission-driven business, because I'm actually solving a problem that I had myself. Whether I'll be able to do it, God knows, I don't know, we'll see. But it's much more of a sort of passion project that I'm doing because I fundamentally really, really want to solve this. And I think we can talk about that a lot afterwards, but I think that's been one of the main lessons for me in starting the second business. So what do we do? Very quickly, we started embarking on this mission where we said, hey, we want to empower people like myself to become their own financial advisors. And we want to build a toolkit for them that consists of financial news, financial education, and financial planning. And our ultimate vision is kind of analogous to Stripe, the payment company. So they say they want to increase the GDP of the internet. And we say, hey, if we're successful, our ultimate aim is we want to increase the net worth of our generation. And so the way we did that was kind of an unconventional approach, or we're still doing it, is that we started off with building a community. And we did this around this daily financial newsletter. And in essence, what it does is within 3 minutes, it explains to you what's going on within the world of finance without using any jargon. I have a short video that I'll show you in a second. And what that has allowed us to do is create a very, very highly engaged community. We actually just hosted an event right in this room on Wednesday. And now we're basically sort of taking that community and introducing them to our platform. But I'll tell you about that after I've shown you my video. If that works. Or do I need to click something?
No, it's fine. I watched it a few times last night when I was setting it up on the presentation. It's worth the wait.
So maybe while we wait, does anybody have any questions already or comments? No? Go for it. Alex.
I can't pause it, sorry.
If you love what you do, this is pretty casual. You warmed up? I've read Finimize, so... What? Finimize is the two most important finance stories from yesterday, condensed into a language that's accessible to everyone. Accessible to everyone? That's cute. It's actually really helpful. Do you want to have a look? I bleed finance. Most people just use it as a figure of speech, but if you were to cut me right now, Good talking. What? Go ahead, cut me. No, I'm not gonna cut. Thank you, kid. Why don't you put that phone down and we do a big boy warm up now, alright? On me. Come on, boy. Recording. Ready when you are. Thanks. Did you not get our email? I'm afraid you didn't make it past the first round back in May. I know. What do you mean? You really shouldn't be here.
So yeah, that's me pretending to be a banker douchebag. So that's kind of how we started off with a very simple newsletter. We now have more than 150,000 people who engage with us through this content, and it's kind of fascinating to see. Because we talk about kind of very, very boring stuff. So we talk about interest rates, and we talk about central banks, and we talk about stock prices, and then because we've managed to somehow like hit the chord with our end users, we can talk about that as well at the end. We've really gotten people to love us, and that has allowed us to build a very, very strong brand, at least for the people within our community. So of the people who refer us to their friends, which is the main driver for us, so we don't spend any money on marketing, 80% use the word love when they refer us. And so here you see, for example, a postcard that somebody brought us. It's a lady she works at JP Morgan. She came to our office, brought us this postcard, brought us these chocolates, and said, "Hey, I was a bit sort of embarrassed to come to your office, but then my boyfriend told me to just do it." And she wrote us this like amazing thank you letter, being like, "I'm really your biggest fan. What you're doing is amazing," and it's like incredible. And like if you think about it, like at the end of the day, we're a newsletter right now that explains to you what's going on within the world of finance, and then you have that, and then you have like another guy works at Ernst & Young as a manager, sitting there with our Finimize socks on his desk, and I think that's something that I've learned through this experience is just like really trying to focus on the end user, and kind of like the mantra that we have within the organization is we want to enlighten you and we want to delight you. And so we'll do stuff like that people will think is kind of crazy because why would you do that? And just to really delight them, whether that's sending out handwritten cards to our end users, whether that's sending them just swag for any reason, and just kind of giving them that like nice surprise when they think, awesome, like this is a really cool company, and that's how they start engaging. And that's what allowed us basically to grow this fairly large community without spending any money on marketing. And now what we're basically doing is that we're saying, hey, it's awesome that you understand what's going on within the world of finance, but now let's help you understand what's going on within your own world of finance, and that's when we're launching this platform called Finimize My Life. And the idea basically is that within a couple of minutes, you can create your own financial plan, and we'll help you answer questions like, how much money should I be saving? How much money should I be investing? Should I get insurance or not? Should I buy a house or should I rent? What kind of a house can I afford? All these questions that most of us have somewhere at the back of our head, but just can't be bothered to really sort of deal with. And we basically want to help you tackle that. We have now more than 25,000 people who've signed up for this. We're taking a very iterative approach. We're releasing this in batches to people so that we can basically identify what do they like, what do they hate, then we fix what they hate, and then we release it to the next batch. This is kind of how it looks today. We basically give you a financial plan for free, something that typically would cost £2,000 with an independent financial advisor. We give that to you for free without the headache, and then basically allow you to integrate your bank account and make the whole thing dynamic and stay up to date, at which point we will then start charging a monthly subscription fee for the service. We try and make it very easy, very educational, help you understand, why should you get an emergency fund, for example. And then using those financial parameters, we then basically want to allow you to, or match you with the right financial product for yourself, rather than you having to go through 15 different price comparison pages. We use the information we have and then try and objectively find the best products for you. And then if you do sort of buy or enter one of these accounts, then some of them will give us a referral fee. So these are sort of the two monetization streams that we're pursuing. We allow you to then obviously stay up to date and track the whole thing, so that it just doesn't stay a static document. And we try and keep the whole thing fun. So we love Drake. So stuff like that, I think, is again tiny nuggets within the product that. Or Easter eggs, as we call them, that really just make people smile. And again, this is something that fundamentally we think is quite a boring topic. So the more Easter eggs you can spread throughout, the better. And then lastly, kind of like, why are we doing this right now? And then I'll come a bit sort of, I guess, into the lessons that I've learned at least. It's kind of an interesting time. Millennials are turning 30. It's typically when you start seeking out financial advice because you're buying a house or getting married, settling down, that kind of stuff. We did a survey the other day that said that more than 50% of millennials actually said that their personal finances have become significantly more important to them over the past 2 years. You combine that with the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind, from a baby boomer generation to the millennial generation. It's estimated that in the US alone, $40 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars of assets will be shifted from the baby boomer generation to the millennial generation, and an estimated 80% of that will not stay with the current financial advisors, and we want to be one of the players who picks that up. And the way we kind of see the market, very topical for disruption. If you think about fintech, it kind of all started with budgeting and Mint in the sort of mid-2000s. Then you had the robo-advisors emerge with Betterment and all these players. Here you have Money Farm, Nutmeg, etc. Now everybody's really focusing on the savings products, and we think that the next sort of frontier will really be financial advice, tying everything together and actually giving intelligent recommendations. And the way we think about it is that if we are successfully doing that, then we want to become the top of mind brand for finance. So today, if you think of shopping, you think of Amazon. If you think of information, you think of Google. But if you think of finance, there really isn't a place that you think of. And ultimately, Finimize wants to become that place. So that's what we're up to now. Maybe I'll tell you like just kind of a couple of lessons that I've learned. I'm still learning every single day. The first thing that's interesting, I think, in hindsight is this difference between a mercenary and a mission-driven company. Like I said, our old company was very, very sales-driven. That's why we got to 100 million in revenue. And now we're basically inverting the whole thing. The reason for that is that we, after 4 years, realized actually we don't really have a mission. We don't have any core values. We don't have really sort of a defined culture. And at the time, I kind of always thought that's like this really soft bullshit. Like, doesn't really matter. And then we saw, okay, like the people that we're hiring aren't the right people, etc. And you sort of start seeing it everywhere. And I think my experience, at least, was that all these soft factors that when you're sort of this young kid, you think is kind of, yeah, I'll take care of that one day. That's exactly the most important stuff that you want to take care early on. Sort of the first 10 to 20 people, they create the DNA. You can't replace your DNA by taking out the shit people later on. So you want to get that right. So we spend a lot of time now at Finimize on, defining what is the culture. We've written down like our own culture manifesto. This is who we are. These are the I don't really believe in core values, but like we have mantras that we abide by, and then we take our time in hiring these people. And we don't do the typical startup thing of like hire and fire. We really, really want to get the best people. We now have people from industry experts from Barclays and Goldman Sachs, and then on the engineering side, people from Facebook, Google, really like amazing people, and that's what makes it fun. And I think the reason why they come to us is definitely not for the money, but they come to us because they fundamentally believe in what we're doing, and they fundamentally think that this is actually solving a problem that they have, and they want to be a part of that. And I think that's then what creates a really, really awesome atmosphere where you don't have to do this micromanaging every single person, but you just hire amazing people, and they then can go and do their own thing. And that is enabled by having this culture. And one of our investors was like, yeah, why are you spending so much time on this like culture stuff? And then he's like, oh yeah, actually it's a good hiring hack. And I was like, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But it's sort of fundamentally, that's been one of the things that at my old company we tried to fix, and we realized it's very, very hard to fix. We spent so much time like, this is our mission, this is what we're doing. And the reality was, I couldn't even tell you like our mission statement. I just didn't have it in my head. So it wasn't like fundamentally ingrained in us. And so that's something that we're really focusing on. And then I think the second thing that I kind of found interesting was this experience of ending up in a market or a sector that I just never saw myself getting into, because I was just sort of following the opportunity, and now fundamentally with this especially, trying to solve a genuine problem that I had. And I think that then, if you're really, really focused on the problem that you're having, and that took us like quite a lot of time to really identify and like define very properly, but in hindsight was like really, really time well spent. Because once you've really nailed that, then you really know like, okay, who are we targeting? Who's sort of what proposition works for that audience? And then you can have these people who start becoming brand ambassadors for yourself, and then allow you to grow because they really, really feel like you're helping them. And I think that is the best way of growing. If you think of like Instagram or Facebook, whatever, you didn't sign up to them because you saw it on a tube ad. You got it because a friend referred it to you, or you didn't hear of Taylor Swift because of the TV ad, probably because of like a friend referred it to you. So like all the stuff that you might think are cool, usually you get it because other people are using it and because other people think it's cool. And so and the only way you can do that is by creating something that's actually genuinely solving a problem. And I think that's something that's, again, I've learned very, very much through this experience and continue to learn that way. So I think those would be sort of the two things off the top of my head that I can think of. And then obviously consistently and constantly learning on top of what was said before. So I'll pause here, and if you have any questions, comments, feel free. Okay, so basically the question, the way I understood it was, how do you balance letting people onto your product versus sort of holding back and iterating? I think for us that was, there were a couple of things. First of all, we like really fundamentally believe in this idea, and I think actually Gmail had this mantra of like, or this vision like, we're gonna launch Gmail, and at the time they had Hotmail, and Hotmail was this big thing, and the guys who started Gmail said, hey, if we can get 100 people to really love Gmail, then we're gonna open it up. And I don't know if you remember, but like back in the day with Gmail, like you had to get these invitation codes, and it was like the hottest thing, and like everybody wanted it. And so we kind of think about it similarly, like if we can get 100 people to really, really love Finimize My Life, then we feel like we've hit that mysterious product market fit. At least we have an indication of it. And so that's one of the things that we've been sort of iterating on is really sort of helping or like zoning in on a few people and like really making them love it. And then once we can get that, then you can start adding features and features and features. And on top of that, then obviously, you know, we also are in the finance space, so we've been working very closely with, you know, the regulators and defining that. So that's also another reason why we've kept this sort of closed for now. But I think sort of the moment that you want to open up is when you have like 100 people or whatever that benchmark is for you, who are like, just give me the product. I cannot live my life without this product anymore. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to have a panel at the end where all three speakers will come up and we can challenge and have the questions then, and we can challenge questions and evolve it, and we've got enough time to do that, hopefully. So thank you very much, Max. Our next speaker is Alistair Shepherd. He founded Sabre, which is about predicting performance, understanding relationships, analytics of such, and ongoing coaching, recruitment, and of course a great depth of, I think, for cultural, really investing in culture. Obviously Max has touched on that a little bit, but culture, absolutely, what he says is absolutely true. I come from the creative and branding world, and trying to fix a culture is an ongoing process, it always is, but it's a harder process than if you actually start at the very beginning and employ the right people. It's like starting at the beginning at school and having the right friends. It's really, really important. Have the wrong friends and you change. Anyway, so Alistair, please come up and enlighten us.
Thanks, Lulu. Thanks, guys. I'm Alistair, and as Lulu said, founder of Sabre, and we build software to help teams work well together. So I'm going to tell you a little bit today about the journey that we went on. Cool, I'll use this. That's confusing. I want to tell you a little bit about the interesting things for me on the journey to building this company. But right before I even started the company, I was living in the US, and I went to a conference called Big Omaha in Nebraska. And I met a lady there called Sarah, who presented her story of her journey starting a company and eventually selling it. And the thing that really struck me about her talk was the way she talked about the life cycle of her journey. And she put up this slide, which was the entrepreneur's life cycle, or the startup life cycle. And I really liked it because I thought it articulated like a potential future path for me. You have this launch hype where you are so excited that you've just started a company and everything is going so well and you are going to rule the world. And then very quickly after the launch hype, you end up at this point of real desperation right down at the bottom. But the interesting thing about this is that you are lower than where you started before you started the company. So you were having a good time, you were fine, and then you reached this euphoric point and then you crashed way below where you thought you could crash. And then you go through this really frustrating period of what she called the humps of iteration, where you try stuff and it doesn't work, and you try stuff and it doesn't work. But the interesting thing again is that you never get past that initial state of how good things are. You kind of oscillate down here where it's terrible. And then eventually you reach what she calls the plateau of disenchantment, where basically nothing happens for ages and you just sort of keep going on. Douglas said he calls it, tenacity. Sometimes I'm not sure if it's tenacity or sheer idiotic perseverance at this point. Are you clinging on for the wrong reasons, but nothing happens in the plateau of disenchantment. And then slowly stuff starts to happen and you begin what Sarah called the sloth ascent. So I thought, having looked at this, that starting this talk today, I would give you a graph of my entrepreneurial journey, which kind of looks like this. This is my interpretation of my journey. So I'll just take you through what happens at the different points. But because this is a very messy graph, I'll use Sarah's instead. So I'll start at the beginning. In 2010, I was studying at Harvard Business School. I looked on the internet for stock photos of Harvard Business School, but they were all really cliched, so I thought I'd use one from my camera. It's a classmate of mine called Jane. And I was studying under a professor called Noam Wasserman, who was in the time writing a book called The Founder's Dilemmas. And it really dug into the detail of what makes an early stage startup company succeed or fail. And the very interesting thing about it was he looked at about 1,500 US-based venture capital firms and found that in about 83% of the cases, venture-backed startups failed, which is very high, but it's not a new stat to most of us. But the interesting thing was that in 65% of the cases, the reason for that failure could be explicitly traced back to team dynamics. And as an aerospace engineer, that was a very interesting thing, because one of the only things you've got control over when you start a company is who you hire, who you bring into the company. Everything else is out with your control. So as an engineer, you think, well, the one thing I've got control over is the thing that's leading to failure, so why can't we dig into this a little bit? And so I started with the question, is it possible to quantify team dynamics in a way that might help me predict startup success? But when you read the literature of team dynamics, psychology isn't really much of a science. Or at least it doesn't have the same level of robustness that you had in engineering or physics. It was a lot of anecdotal stories with very small data sets producing statistics with very weak correlations. And most of it was focused around this concept of, well, if we can try to understand the individual in enough detail or enough depth, then when we put these individuals together, we might be able to understand the team. And the problem with that is that when you look at my characteristics from a sort of personality perspective, I'm an introvert or an extrovert, and the challenge with that is that I work very well with introverts. I also work very well with extroverts. So your personality type wasn't helping me understand what makes a good team. But when you're in a team, you know very quickly whether it's good or not. It's the relationships between people that really matter. So we had this question of, well, okay, maybe we could look at, can we predict a good relationship instead? That's a far more interesting question. And so in order to do this prediction of relationships, we decided to look at a data source that could help us do this. So we went to online dating. Online dating, in the olden days before apps, I say olden days, like a couple of years ago, before the app type dating, you had these really rich profiles where people would pour their hearts out about what they were looking for and who they were as people. And what we were looking for were patterns in successful matches. And we defined a successful match as two people who meet online and then close their account because they found a successful match. And that's a really interesting point in human psychology, because in online dating, it's a very transactional environment. You go on a lot of dates, but you keep your profile open just in case you meet somebody better. So when you close your account, what you're saying is this person is significantly better than anyone I've met so far, but more importantly, they're better than anyone I hope to meet in the future. And that is a really key shift in the way that we think about relationships. So we started looking at the data from online dating, and we found some really interesting things, like this chart here. So this is a chart of men's rating of women in terms of how attractive they are in online dating. And I've taken the data from OkCupid in this case. So the top graph is one woman, and the bottom graph is another woman. And it's a rating of out of 5. So the top graph, most people agree that this lady is attractive. She gets an average rating of 4 out of 5, and most people agree that she's a 4 out of 5. The bottom lady, some people think she's horrendous, but other people think she's the best looking girl they've ever seen. Nobody thinks she's kind of average, or very few people think she's average. And what we found was the more people disagreed about how attractive somebody were, the stronger they felt about it. So in online dating, don't be average. Be either horrendous, and a large number of people will find you not horrendous, but actually the most attractive person they've ever met. Counterintuitive. And we thought, this is really interesting. What other counterintuitive things could we find? And we found this. The less serious you are about religion, the more liked you are, even by very religious people. That doesn't make sense either. So we kept going. Frequent tweeters have shorter real-life relationships than average. And it was these interesting data points, not these 3 per se, but interesting counterintuitive data points about relationships that made us think that we might be able to predict relationship success, because we found statistically predictive data points. Things like whether you share the same view on horror movies could predict whether you were going to be in a better relationship or not. And when we added them all together and combined them with some of the more consistent theories around academic behavior research, we had what we thought would be a good way to predict team performance in the early days. So myself and my co-founder Sam set about to create a company. This is day one of the company. This is the first time Sam and I sat down and we said, we're going to do this. And Sam, we're in Sam's parents' house here, and on their kitchen table, and his mother took a picture of us sometime in the morning, deciding to start a company. So at this point, we are what Sarah calls launch hype. This is it. We're going to build a company. It's going to go great. So we started with a couple of early experiments to see if we really could predict team performance. And in doing all of this sort of thinking and research in online dating, I'd convinced myself that it was possible and that we were going to be able to do it. So I started bragging about our abilities to predict team performance, having never done it before, to a professor at Bristol University. And it just so happened that during that summer, he was going to be running a sort of condensed entrepreneurial competition. It was going to be a week long, and there were going to be about 8 teams of about 8 people in each team coming together to compete in a business plan competition. And I didn't know this, and I was bragging about how we could predict team performance. And he said, well, I've got this thing coming up, so go on then, predict which team is going to win the competition. So I sort of panicked at this point, went home, wrote some very janky code in Visual Basic, which communicated with a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, to try to build an algorithm that could put together these pieces of information that we had from online dating. And we put it into a Google form and sent it out to all of the attendees for the competition before they arrived at the event. So they had never met each other. And we sent them out this little questionnaire that said, do you like horror movies, etc. And we received all of the answers. Then the professor told us who was going to be in which team, and our software ranked the teams from best predicted relationships or team dynamics to worst predicted team dynamics. And we were going to hope that our ranking of team dynamics roughly correlated to the outcomes of the event. Curiously, we got the precise ranking of all 8 teams spot on. And we had no understanding of their skills, their experience, their demographic, or the idea that they were working on. All we knew was whether they liked horror movies, that kind of thing. And so we repeated this experiment, and the most impressive result that we got was at the Microsoft Imagine Cup. So I pulled some data from the real teams that we did. Microsoft Imagine Cup is a student competition to build apps on the Windows platform. And it's a year-long competition, and teams come together to compete over the course of the year. And we went to the UK final. So there'd been hundreds of teams so far, and they'd narrowed them down to 10 teams. So they should be of roughly the same level. And we did the same process. We sent them a little survey and got the data back. So on the left-hand side, we've got Team 1. This is the team that we thought would win the competition. And on the right-hand side, we've got Team 10, the competition that the team that we thought would come last in the competition. The sort of green chart with all of these 80 plus numbers is our algorithm's definition of the relationship between pairs of people. So each number is a score between me and Lulu, me and somebody else on the team, and so on. And the bottom chart is how diverse they were in their behaviors and their personalities. So what we were looking for was very strong relationships and very diverse behaviors and personalities. And in one team we found it, and this was the best, the team that our algorithm put first. On the right-hand side, we had a team that had very weak relationships with each other, according to our algorithm, and they were all pretty much the same type of person. They had the same personality. And we thought that they were going to do very badly. In this case, we got the ranking of all 10 teams spot on, which is a chance of 1 in 3.6 million. So we repeated this about 21 times, and we had more than 95% accuracy in predicting the ranking of teams in short-term entrepreneurial environments. And at this point, companies started coming up to us and saying, well, if you can predict team performance, come and do it in my company. Help me choose who to hire, because you can tell me whether this candidate is going to be a success in this team, or I'm staffing a new project from a pool of internal employees. Come and help me design that team. So we thought, right, let's go to London. So I went to London. Sam went to Australia because his girlfriend moved out there. And I came here to London. But it was a little bit dangerous because I had about £500 left in my overdraft before the bank would give me no more money. And we weren't paying ourselves at this point at all. And I had just come out of university, so I was very cash poor at this point. And I arrived in London with £500 left in my overdraft, and I spent £450 of it on rent for the first month. And I was living in a really horrible flat share that didn't have a lock on the front door, in East London. And the reason my rent was so cheap was because my housemates were drug dealers, and that's how they could afford to pay this cheap rent. I didn't know this when I moved in, but I realized pretty quickly. So I had a room which was tiny in East London, and when you opened the door to my bedroom, the door would hit the bed. So you had to sort of squeeze in, close the door, and then you had about 3 feet in which you could get changed before going to bed. But it was a broom cupboard, so it had this sloping roof. So at one end of my bed, I couldn't sit up, and I had to sort of crawl into bed each night. So I arrived in London feeling rather desperate. So I had £50 left to live on and buy food and drink. And as you know, that's not very much money in London. You can spend that in a day. So I started thinking, how can I meet the people I need to meet in order to get this business off the ground? Because the concept that we were selling was exciting but new, so companies didn't know how to pay for it. So they were having these internal conversations. And sales cycles are predictably long, longer than a month. And this is when I met, well, actually, according to Sarah's graph, this is when I reached rock bottom. I realized that we didn't have a clue. We had a nice, fancy idea and some fun stats from a Microsoft competition, and definitely didn't have any money. But it was at this point, working out of the basement of Google Campus in the cafe, that I met SeedCamp. And SeedCamp said, this is very interesting. Why don't you become part of our cohort? And I couldn't believe it, because this was exactly what we were looking to try to do. So we became part of SeedCamp's cohort, which put me back up to level pegging where I started. We got a little bit of investment from them, so I could, move house first and find a different place to live. And we repeated some of the experiments, but this time we did it with SeedCamp's cohort, because I said to SeedCamp, well, listen, you invest in companies. We can tell you how successful those companies are going to be. We know not only who you're going to invest in, but how they're going to fare. And SeedCamp said, bullshit. But go on, do it anyway. So this is data from 2 companies in the cohort that we got accepted into in SeedCamp. The company on the left is the company that we thought would do best out of the cohort that they invested in, and the company on the right is the company that we thought would struggle the most. So we ranked the companies from 1 to 21 in the potential cohort, and they invested in 11. We got 8 out of that 11 correct, which wasn't our best result, but they were gobsmacked. And we said, this company on the right was the company that we had ranked 11th. And we said, listen, SeedCamp, we think that this company is going to struggle because there's this one dynamic in here where the person who is the CEO of the company has got very bad relationships with the rest of the team. And they said, well, what do you want us to do about it? And I said, don't do anything. And in fact, don't tell anyone else in SeedCamp. Do what you normally do, and let's see if we're right. A week after SeedCamp signed the investment papers, the company folded for the reason that we suggested. They totally tore themselves apart from a team dynamic perspective, and the company disbanded. The company on the left is the company that has, since that first sort of profiling in 2013, have raised the most amount of money, hired the most number of employees, and are making the most amount of revenue. In the company on the right, the CTO of that company was a chap called Nick Brabora. And after the company collapsed, we said to Nick, we knew this was going to happen. We predicted it. But we've also profiled you against our team, and you're an exceptional match, and we need a CTO. Do you want to come and work with us? And he was furious. He was like, why didn't you tell me that this was going to happen? And then we let him cool off for a bit, bought him a load of gin and tonics, and eventually he said, I'm in. And he's been our CTO ever since, and he is one of the best hires we've made. So this started our journey of talking to companies, trying to use this as a use case. And one of the use cases we came across was we want to fire person X. We want to fire our lowest performers. Can you tell us who it is? If your software is so good, you should be able to tell us who our lowest performer is without ever meeting them, without ever predicting it. And if you can do that, then we're interested in using you for performance management. And we were a little bit unsure about this because ethically we don't want to become an Axeman. But we thought, well, we're a startup, we'll take what we can get. So we went to this company in Australia, and they had been operating for about 20 years, and they had a product development department of about 20 people. So we looked at all 20 people. Each column is a person, and the very bottom row is their average relationship score with everybody else in that 20-person team. So we ranked them from worst average quality relationships predicted by our software to best average quality relationships. So this is what we call culture fit. We thought, well, we're essentially assessing the culture fit of people in this team, and we think that the culture fit will translate into performance. So this is the least likely person to get fired, and this is the most likely person to get fired. And it turned out that we were spot on. This person on the left was the person that we were going to fire, and we said, interestingly, we also think these 3 people are underperforming too, so you should probably watch out for them. And they said, you're right, they are underperforming. And we said, we think those people on the right are some of your top performers. And they said, yeah, you're right, they are some of our top performers. So at this point, we had a product. But it was all about teamwork, and I know what you think about teamwork. You think like stock photos from the 90s. Right? Teamwork is really unsexy. Whenever you talk about teamwork, people sort of go like, oh, it's not really tech. It's like that fuzzy psychology stuff, kind of what your investor was saying. That's a cute hiring hack. But what I think about teamwork is I think about this. This is me writing out the algorithm for our very first product. This is me writing out the maths for it. So for me, as an engineer, thinking about systems and how systems can be designed to be built better, there is no more interesting system than human systems. And if we can quantify it, then we can design it to be a little bit better. So at this point, we're sort of going through the humps of iteration. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We raise a little bit of cash. Oops. We raise a couple of million, and we get to this point of, all right, we've got this product. It's kind of going okay, but companies don't really know how to buy it because it's challenging a lot of their current processes. And in big companies, improving people's performance is a much more attractive proposition than predicting people's performance. Because in the startup phase, you go through this growth mindset where you hire lots of people, and if you can sort of dazzle them with the growth prospects of your company, you don't need to worry about how happy they are because they'll be motivated by the journey that you're going to go on. But in large companies, the way that they try to incentivize their employees is to say, we will invest in you, we will invest in your development. And so judging people about how good a fit they are is a very unattractive proposition for employees in large companies. So companies were saying to us, can we use the same type of data to develop our employees? And I want to sort of show you a little screenshot or a couple of mathematical models that I think really articulate how you can do this in large organizations. This is a flock of starlings. It's a murmuration. It's called a murmuration. There are thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of birds, all flying in different directions, but in undeniable unison. There's no leader, but they're definitely acting with some sort of collective purpose. And organizations have this challenge. We've got thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people. They're all independent. How can we get them to act in unison? And how can we understand this from a mathematical perspective? So if we were to build a mathematical model of this, the first approximation we would have is this. You can't really see it because of the lights. Can you see it at the back? Yeah. There are some white dots flying around on the screen in a very chaotic order. So we're going to apply a couple of rules, and I want to show you how simple it is to create complex systems with very simple rules. The first rule is that each bird must fly at the same speed. So already the model looks a bit more intelligible, but it looks nothing like the real flock of starlings. So we'll add rule number 2, which is each bird must stay close to its neighbor. So now it looks a little bit more like a flock, but it doesn't behave like a real flock. That's not what it really looks like. So we'll add rule number 3, which is that each bird must avoid danger. So danger is represented by those 2 larger blobs. And suddenly, we've got a mathematical model which represents the real world model almost exactly. And this is how simple it is to understand human systems. One of the things I like most about humans is our ability to convince ourselves that we are more special than the world around us. We are not. We adhere to very simple rules. The question is, what are those rules? And can we write them down so that we can start to use them to our benefit? And it turns out that in this model, in order for it to work best, when I say each bird must stay close to its neighbor, it must stay close to its closest 7 neighbors. In essence, a flock of starlings is not a flock as one whole. It is a collection of sub-teams. So it is a team of teams. And in human systems, this is the same. So we started getting onto this concept of, what about team development? And in case you need a little bit of proof that teams are important in human systems, this is a chart of how many people have shared the Nobel Prize since its inception. In every category, apart from literature, in order to win the Nobel Prize, you have to work as a team. So we sort of propose at Sabre that the hardest problems of today are not only more easily solved by teams, but they actually require teams in order to be solved. And they require effective teams. So at this point, we're onto this concept of effective teams is where we're going to focus. And we sort of trundle along trying to figure out how do you build a product about effective teams. And we come across this researcher called Sandy Pentland from MIT. And he did this fascinating study where he went to look at effective teams. And what he found was when he sat in the room with them, the effective teams, you could notice this audible buzz. There was a real sense that they were performing well. And he said, well, what is this? How can we measure it? So he tied these little devices around their neck called sociometric badges. And the sociometric badges measured all sorts of things about how they were behaving as teams. How much they were talking, who they were talking to, what direction they were facing when they spoke. And they did it in lots of different environments, from theatre teams in hospitals, call center teams, product development teams, front of house staff in banks. And he found that in all of these different environments, which are very diverse, communication patterns between people accounted for more than 50% of the variance in performance. Which is to say, communication patterns in teams is more important than all of the other factors of teamwork combined. So if you're trying to understand why a team is performing well or not, you could look at loads of different things. But if you were to look at one thing, you would look at the communication patterns between people. So at this point, we started building a product for team development. And after a while, that morphed into our flagship product, which is CoachBot. CoachBot is a digital coach for teams. It essentially has conversations with each individual in a team, figures out from their perspective what's going on, where the opportunity is, where the problems are, brings that team together and helps them focus around a particular area of development. Be that setting clear goals, defining a purpose that they all can get behind, clearly understanding who's got what role and what responsibilities, how to do effective feedback, etc. So at this point, we started up the sloth ascent. And we're getting to near the end of our journey here. So we started selling it to various different companies. We got featured in loads of different news outlets. And what was exciting was people have very strong opinions about this type of technology. When a computer suddenly starts to help you understand how to speak with your colleagues, some people find that really enlightening, like, yes, this is really exciting. Some people think it's, the beginning of the end. The machines are really coming. But what's heartening for us is that large companies who are doing meaningful work started buying our software quite quickly. So we started working with the NHS recently, and I'll share a stat as to why they think teamwork is so important. In the acute care units of the NHS, about 40% of the teams behave as good teams should. About 40% of them set clear goals, have well-defined roles and responsibilities, have effective communication patterns. If that number were to increase to 65%, there would be 5,000 more avoidable deaths each year. So team effectiveness in the NHS directly translates into mortality rate. So when we sold to the NHS, it took them 2 weeks from first call to money in the bank with our product. And that is where I'm going to leave you today. We are slowly beginning this sloth ascent. We haven't got there, but these are the things that I think are really going to help us challenge the bigger companies out there. That's it.
Thank you very much, Alistair. So if we could have the speakers up on the stage, if you could grab a stool. I'm afraid we've only got 2 microphones, which means I'm going to give Hannah 1 for the audience. Because we're live, you have to use a microphone. And I'm going to give this one to you guys.
Thanks.
And I'm going to have to stand behind this one. Put me in my place. So when you speak, can you obviously shut that microphone around accordingly. So we seem to have had quite a few questions on Twitter, which is always good. Makes my life a little bit easier. But before I start any... Is it on? Hang on, because you might have to run around with this. It's working? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Jackie. Is that okay? Oh, it's the battery. Oh, that's annoying. Hannah, sorry, I'm going to have to use that one. Don't worry, we're never going to have more than one person speaking at a time. So what I'll do is I'll just use this one for you guys in the audience. So thank you guys, that was unbelievable. Really, really interesting, really enlightening. Audience, would you like to ask any questions before I start sharing? Alistair.
Is this the time to get into?
Yes, yeah, get in, challenge.
So this is a question to Alistair. I'm also an Alistair. 2 questions. Firstly, I've been recently reading a book called Powers of Two by an author called Joshua Wolfshank, and it's about chemistry within relationships. And one of the things that stuck out from that book was Steve Jobs saying that he wants to build Apple like the relationship between Lennon and McCartney, because there they had a certain amount of conflict as well as collaboration. So I'm just interested in your comment on that. And then secondly, are you good at online dating?
So there are 2 types of conflict you can have in teams. There's constructive conflict or there's destructive conflict. And you want to maximize constructive conflict. Constructive conflict is when you and I profoundly disagree about the approach that we take, but we have a unified goal and we respect each other. And after having had this conflict, there is no damage to our relationship whatsoever, which means we are more inclined to get into a discussion again in the future because it wasn't painful personally. And that is what you're trying to maximize within teams. Lennon and McCartney is an interesting one because it actually turned quite destructive toward the end. And so what you're trying to maximize is teams that can have the psychological safety to discuss these issues. And there are a bunch of predictors of psychological safety. Things like, do we share core values as people, which is to say, do we have the same motivations and the same understanding of what is morally right or what is a good outcome? But then we might want to maximize the different experiences that we have, the different sort of sources of information that we are coming at, or different skill sets. So you want to minimize values diversity, but maximize cognitive diversity. And that produces that beautiful sort of conflict state that you're looking for.
Can I follow up?
Oh, well, I don't think my girlfriend would like it if I did online dating anymore.
Can I just follow up on that answer? Because I've just been involved with a turnaround of a company that was going out of business and having to restructure it and make it more commercial. It's very engineering led. So, I mean, what you are looking for looks like a harmonious relationship for building something that is set by a CEO. But in some organizations, you actually need to create disharmony to identify which are the elements you need to get rid of. Because it's not always easy from the I don't think it's very easy from a pure external analysis without taking into account what the company needs to do to succeed in the marketplace.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is one of the reasons why we broadened into team development rather than team design, which is to say there are more than just the relationships at play that create a successful team. And one of the things that all of the research agrees on is if the team have clear goals and a very unified purpose, they will be more successful as a foundation. And in the process of agreeing what your purpose is and defining your goals, you weed out the people who don't agree with the direction that the company is going or the team is going. Now, sometimes it's not a case of weeding them out. Sometimes it's a case of making sure that everybody is aligned. But sometimes if the direction that people are aligning around doesn't fit well with somebody else, that is a question that they have is this where I want to be or do I want to be somewhere else? So I absolutely agree. It's not just about the relationships.
Thank you. I don't mean to hog Alistair, but this is hopefully relevant to Sabre. We're a startup. We're right in between the hype and trough, but we're working with a group of clinicians at the moment, and we're trying to take some of their learnings and insights and apply those to patients and healthcare consumers. So question, and forgive me if it's an ignorant question, could your learnings and practice apply to teams of consumers as much as it can teams of employees? We're thinking in particular about how we not just motivate but genuinely guide and help consumers to achieve particular health and wellness goals without mandating rules or saying, hey, lay off the pizza, and all the conventional things that often drive people away from that behaviour rather than drive them towards it.
I think the important thing is to understand what is a team and what is not a team. With consumers, it's an individual. Can I change my individual behavior? Can I do the individual things that will make me more successful? And we're not focused on individuals at all. We're focused very much on teams where people have to work together in order to achieve a particular goal. Now, if your goal in your personal life is to lose weight, helping the people around you understand what your goal is useful. But unless they are also working toward that same goal, which is your weight loss, it will be difficult for them to really help you do that. So we're focused on environments where you've got collaborative teams where people have to work together in order to achieve a goal, the same goal that is shared by everybody, rather than an individual person, I've got this aspiration.
So my question is more for Max than Alistair. So Alistair can hand over the mic. Max, when you clearly built a really impressive following amongst a quite a specific demographic. What were the things which contributed most to people's kind of love of the Finn of Mars brand? How did you kind of identify the things that people really loved and then extrapolate and exaggerate those to maximise your following?
It's a good question. Short answer is probably I don't know. I think kind of the way we approach this is, first of all, I have no experience in brand whatsoever. Again, that was one of those things that I thought was like a soft thing. I think what resonated with people was that, first of all, one of the mantras that we have at Finimize is fairly standard, I guess, in the startup world is eat your own dog food. And so it's like, if we don't use our own product, then why would anybody else? And so we've been very, very focused on, okay, like how can we make this more interesting? How can we make this more engaging, etc. And then I think one of the things that we really try and push for is just embrace reality. And so one of the things specifically with what we're doing was finance in particular, personal finance, it's pretty dull for most people. And so we never set out to make it super sexy or exciting. We said, hey, everybody kind of wants to understand it. People aren't really willing to sit down on a Sunday and really understand it over a couple of hours. So maybe we can just every day fit into their habits. And that's why, for example, we just have 3 minutes every day that it takes to read the newsletter. And that's why, you know, we're also designing the platform in a way that kind of makes it sort of a bit more snackable. And I think embracing that fact and not saying, hey, we're just going to take this and we're going to make this super exciting, but saying, you know what, it's pretty dull. We're not going to make it less dull, but we're going to make it more digestible, maybe more accessible, and try and help you that way. I think that's kind of one of the things that seems to have worked very well. And then I think the other thing is just being super user-centric. Again, nothing super controversial, but you know, some of the people that we hired specifically for the more sort of content and substance side came from very corporate backgrounds from large banks, and they came up to me and they're like, you guys are like super obsessed with your users. Like, why does it matter that you like, I don't know, answer an email within a couple of hours, stuff like that. And I think these tiny little things add up. Again, like a very small example is anybody could write me an email. Like I read every single email. And I give them out my phone number on the like welcome email, stuff like that. Which is like I don't get a lot of phone calls from users. I get the occasional like text message, but it just kind of like shows, hey, we're actually humans, which is kind of unusual in the finance space. And so these kind of like small little things that we just try out that make us a bit more accessible seem to have worked really well.
Hi, it's a question for any one of you really. You've all talked about your products which have been cutting edge and ahead of what the market wants and recognises that they need, and you've talked about issues about trying to get people to understand, well, how do we actually make that first sale? Is it luck that you get that first sale? Is it tenacity? And what have you actually done to make those things happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of every time it's a bit like fighting a war. You know, you're poking in a lot of different places, and you're trying to find a place where you transition. I love the Crossing the Chasm book. If you're old enough like me, it was a book by Geoffrey Moore in the 90s talking about the days of enterprise sales and its glory, where you would find a beachhead across a chasm, and you would, you know, you'd own that beachhead, and then you'd spread left and right down the coast. And for me, you know, the very first business, it was about backup infrastructure. But I had a second product when I first started selling that in that company. I thought that was the one that was going to make me the money. But it turned out the people I was talking to were much more interested in the backup software. So I dropped the first product and I focused on the second one. And the second business, I had a product that was too far ahead of its time. People did not have the budget for it. They did not know how to buy it. We did not know how to sell it perhaps as well. And then we had that meeting with PC World Business, which transformed it dramatically and pivoted the whole business, because then we tested it with every retailer, and every retailer said we have the same problem. And in this business, originally I was thinking about how women shop, actually, which is, you know, women shop in a social, I'm generalizing here, but women enjoy shopping the way that men enjoy going to a rugby match. Except they come back with something tangible, and the men come home smelling and, you know, spent a lot of money on beer. But it was about that social side, but there was no money in fashion. And I turned around to my own personal relationship with my banker and Shazam. Okay, there is a service industry which is willing to pay money to solve compliance issues, security issues, cost of engagement issues. So, as I said, every time it has been a bit of luck, but also tenacity, looking across the piece for that spot where we're going to cross the chasm.
Our first sale was it was in cash. We had done this experiment in Seed Camp, presented our results in front of a whole bunch of people. It's a sort of bit of showmanship. And somebody came up to us afterwards and said, "Could you profile this candidate I'm about to hire?" And we said, "No, we're still in like development. We don't want to do it." And he said, "No, really, could you do it?" And we said, "No, we don't want to do it." And he pulled out cash from his wallet, this wad of cash, and he said, "Profile my candidate." So we took this cash and we were like, all right, I guess we'll do that. And I think that epitomizes the first bunch of sales that we had, which was we were really focused on, does this work? Is it robust enough? Can we trust the outcome of it? But we kept doing these showman stunts where we kept trying to sort of showcase it in very public forums, and people kept coming up to us afterwards and said, do this for me, take my cash. Now, of course, we do some more structured approaches to sales, but the early ones we weren't focused on selling at all. We were focused on showcasing the effectiveness of what we were doing. And I think that, where you can show value, you'll generate sales.
Sorry, you're getting quite a lot today, aren't you? Do you ever worry about the actual mental health impact of perhaps what you might be doing if that person gets pulled up as being the weak link? Maybe more going on than kind of the numbers.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. Which is another reason that we shifted very much from this judgment model where we were judging or assessing how good you were to this development model. So now our product, CoachBot, doesn't judge you at all as an individual or as a team. So if you're one of the worst teams in the company, if you're really terrible at goal setting, rather than saying, you guys are like a 2 out of 10 on goal setting, we just say, one of the areas that you could really benefit from is setting clearer goals. Here's how you can do that. So the very best teams in the organization, all they want to know is what they can do to stretch themselves, to be better. The very worst teams in the organization, all they want to know is what they can do to be better. And you're absolutely right. Anytime we introduce judgment into sort of grading people at work, it has detrimental impacts on all sorts of things, particularly their performance. So this is why a lot of large organizations are throwing out performance management systems at the moment.
It's a question for Max. If you're answering phone calls or emails, how are you going to scale up the business? Because it seems to me that it's going to go big.
I think one of my favorite stats is the founder of WhatsApp handled customer requests up until they had 150 million users. Okay. And so if you can do that, then I think we're very, very far from reaching that point.
Good luck.
Just one more for Alistair. So you mentioned how your service is for businesses to look at their employees, but could you use it the other way around for an employee to rate businesses and see where they might best feel like they could fit in, or if it's the right people for them?
Yeah, and we're talking to a couple of companies that place candidates into large organizations at scale to do just that. But again, I think the direction that we're really pushing for is less about matchmaking now and more about, you're in this situation, how do you make the best out of it? That, for us as a team, is the most exciting prospect.
Can I just interrupt with one question from Twitter? Sorry, we've got quite a few from Twitter. Alistair, is this platform not just the interactive interpretation of traditional psychometric testing?
No, traditional psychometric testing is very much about an individual, understanding in as much detail as you possibly can about the individual. And there are two types of models for that. There's a type-based model like Myers-Briggs, where you are a type. And then there's the trait-based model where you have different traits that define your character. In the type-based model, it's got a lot of problems because Douglas and I might be the same type, but we would have a very different relationship with another person. So the type-based model really fails to understand the differences between us and the differences in the relationships that we form. The trait-based model is much better because it can understand in more granularity who we are as individuals. But that's where the similarities between what we do and what other providers do stops. We focus on the relationships between people, not the characteristics that define you. We focus on what is it that is going to make Douglas and I work well together? What is it that is going to make Douglas and I struggle to work well together?
And if there's a missing link, you can see the missing link. Can you find the missing link?
In terms of
the dynamics of the team.
Yeah, and you can say to a team, it looks like you're struggling with this process, being more process orientated. None of the people in your team are particularly process-minded. But the point, again, is not to point out the flaws, it's not to point out the inadequacies in an individual or a team. For us now, the focus really is about how can we take this group of people and make them the very best version of themselves. And that, for me, is the most exciting application of AI or machine learning or any technology, is not to judge us as humans, but to empower us.
Max, what in reality is the age demographic? Is it really subscribed to for the new generation?
I mean, our sort of core target group are, people in their late 20s, early 30s. Those make up the majority. We have sort of outliers. We have kids who are 12 in school, all the way to, we had a kind of funny story. A hedge fund manager from New York gave us a call on a Friday or his hectic analyst set up a call. And then the first attempt, he didn't show up. And then the second attempt, he showed up. And he told us, hey, guys, I've just found you. I've been in this business for 25 years. I work on Wall Street. I have my own hedge fund. I manage $5 billion in assets. And all I just want to tell you guys is that I have access to all the information in the world. And what you guys produce every day is the best thing I've come across, which was crazy to us. But we have quite a lot of these sort of very, 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 very senior people on Wall Street who read us every single day. But that is not our target group, and that's not really who we're aiming for, but that's just kind of a nice to have, I guess.
That's congratulations. How is it in reality utilized? Is it just great as an education tool, or is it the new platform of financial advisor for the millennials?
I mean, we have these two products right now. So we have the newsletter, and then we have the platform. The platform obviously still is in testing mode. The idea is that we basically educate you and get you interested in the world of finance through the daily newsletter, and kind of just get that mind share, and just sort of slowly sort of onboard you into the world of finance. And then on the platform, the idea is obviously to say concretely, like, how can we help you sort out your own finances? It's very much about sort of educating and then actually providing the tools to help you. Because I guess today what you can do is you can go onto a price comparison site and spend 5 hours figuring out, if you click on a savings account, it tells you there's 10 different savings accounts now, and you kind of just already lost any interest in pursuing that. And so we want to go beyond the educational part and actually sort of saying, like, specifically this would make sense in your case. So it's education and then execution.
Does that fall into the category of advice?
Good question. So the short answer is no. It's considered guidance, if you want to use the regulator or the sort of the legal terms. But that is exactly one of the things that we're currently exploring, because the model that we're basically proposing is quite new in sort of the nature of the model, and so that's something that we're exploring at the moment.
So back to the Twitter feed. This is for Alistair. What functions are the main clients for Sabre in a business? Is it human resources? There's a couple of questions. Do they think culture is understood and driven by human resources, and if not, by whom in a business?
So I think there are two main buyers within organizations. There are the Learning and Development Department, which sits within HR, and HR more broadly, whose job it is to centrally help the teams within their organization. And they've got the big budgets that they can say, this is a program that we really want to provide to all of our employees. And that can come from that L&D function. Sometimes it comes from the C-suite or other sort of centralized management functions, but most often learning and development. The other buyer is team managers who say, gosh, it would be really great if I could help my team perform a little bit better and become a little bit more unified. But we see most of our business come from the central functions. What was the second part?
So do you think culture is understood and driven by HR, and if not, by whom in the business?
The culture of any company is simply an addition of all of the individuals within that company. It is heavily influenced by senior figures within the organization. In younger companies, it's very heavily influenced by the founders or the founding team or the early employees within the business. In larger organizations that have been around for a lot longer, one of the challenges they find is how do senior leadership influence the culture of the business, because it really is owned by the employee base. And so one of the things that we are trying to help companies do is view their culture as a team of teams rather than this one lumbering thing that kind of has no meaning to anyone else. Is to say, let's start at the team level because that's where things get done. That's also where things get undone. So let's just focus there and get each team performing at their best, and that will cascade up into creating a good culture. If you combine that with some top-down clarity, you can really do good things.
Because as you saw from your presentation, the diversity of your clients is actually quite widespread. It's not sector-specific by any means, is it? Are they dominated by data-driven businesses like banks, for example?
No. So we have a bit of an internal joke about what our target market is. We have heavy engineering firms who build pumping and pipeline systems within large cities. We have luxury fashion retailers like Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. We have the NHS. And the other day, somebody quite senior in a national military called me up and they said, hey, we're looking to see if we can get better performance out of our military teams. And I turned around to the rest of the team and I said, hey, this army are interested in us. And they were like, yep, square in our target market. It's, but the unifying thing between all of our companies is, do people have to work together in order to achieve a goal? Where they do, this teamwork principles apply to performance. Where they don't, where they're just a collection of individuals who kind of perform more as a group, which is not most of the work that we know, then our software isn't for them.
This is a question probably for all of you. How do you manage compliance and legislation?
That was one of the grounding principles of our company, is that we had to build something that was not going to be rejected by the compliance officer at the bank. So we actually went to the FCA before we actually started building the product. We had the use cases we wanted to test with them. This is pre-sandbox days for the FCA, and so they were quite surprised somebody even asked them ahead of time. They nodded their heads and said, that's great, have you thought of this, have you thought of that? And compliance has been a thread throughout the fabric of Novastone. As I said earlier this year, the change in regulatory framework in Asia with regards to WhatsApp and WeChat drove innovation to us, and also has now driven an explosion of our business in the Asian marketplace. So compliance can be very much a spur to innovation, be it climate change, be it banking regulation.
I mean, I kind of already talked about it. I think for us, we are, again, very much trying to work together with regulators on this, and they see that we're kind of also what I talked about before, trying to solve a genuine problem rather than just make a quick buck. And I think on the one hand, it's a very sort of intensive process of going through that and making sure that you are compliant. On the other hand, I totally see the value in it from a consumer point of view, so I think it's definitely the right thing to do. And obviously we seek that dialogue also with regulators, because at the end of the day, we're trying to help our end users, and one of the sort of prerequisites for doing that is obviously that you are very much compliant with all the regulation that's out there.
I've just noticed, sorry, we've overrun slightly, so unless there's any more questions from the audience, what I might do, because I've got loads more questions, is actually put them up on the website and let everybody sort of see the questions and see the answers as we develop this further, if that's okay, guys. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for watching live. We've had a really good time today, and yeah, thank you. Do stay. We have the room for another couple of hours if you want to just chat amongst yourselves and ask some more questions that you didn't want to do to the live audience. Thank you very much. See you January, the last Friday of the month in January, for next time. Please give me your details. If you want to be invited, you can get it up on the website, ripitup.co. Thank you.